the Volkswagen Beetle, the Citroen 2CV, and even more recently, the Tata Nano. The thing all those cars have in common is that they're cars of the people. You know, something that the average man can buy with a few months of salary. Now, this is a 2021 Nissan Versa. This is the equivalent of the working man's car. This, in its base format, is the cheapest car you can buy today in America. As far as the label, the cheapest car in America goes, take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, because this particular one that we have here is a Nissan Versa SV, which starts around the $19,000 and change MSRP, as you can see right here. And it comes with pretty much like painted door handles, door mirrors, and also it comes with rims instead of your steelies with hubcaps. You also have this diffuser down here that's paint matched. Everything else can be had with the S or the base models, including these backup sensors. We do have a backup camera on here. So the exterior of the Versa is a pretty decent looking car for the amount of money you pay for it. The smaller upright looking sedan that it used to be, this doesn't look as bad. It has the front end of, say, the Altima, Sentra, or the Nissan family. You can see the little Nissan emblem with the radar in it integrated. This car actually has also a radar up there. Aside that, there's not much to write home about. It's not a bad looking car, to be honest, for the amount of money. You have the turn signals integrated into the door mirrors. Coming along the side profile, you have this trim piece that is actually used also in the Altima and Maxima to match those cars. Tail lights that also resemble kind of sort of Altima. So the exterior is kind of like a more squished together Nissan Altima. Nothing too crazy, but it's a decent looking vehicle. It doesn't look as, I guess, narrow as it used to. This particular one comes with 205s, which also contributes to it handling decent on the highway, unlike the older models that used to have like 185s and 195s, which drove really just sketchy on the road. Same thing with the Mitsubishi Mirage. The tire size and the track width of this thing, also the wheelbase, is a big reason why I would take this over something like a Mirage, because this thing drives a lot better on the highway compared to those cheap cars. Alright, so under the hood of the Nissan Versa, we get a 1.6 liter naturally aspirated inline 4-cylinder making 122 horsepower. Not a whole lot of power. It is an improvement over the previous generations, but for something of this price range, it actually gets out of its own way. It is indeed connected to a CVT transmissions, like the rest of Nissan lineup. CVT in this thing actually goes through gears, as I'll get into in a little bit. It doesn't drive like a CVT. I think they tuned the CVT to actually shift between gears and change ratios off the line to, I guess, compensate for the lack of low-end torque of this tiny little engine. So it actually doesn't feel too bad on the road. All right, so before getting into the interior of this car, you can see the typical Nissan key that goes with these cars. These do all come with push to start, unlike the old ones that still had a key. So it's pretty nice to have this for this type of price range. Hopping into the interior, starting this thing up, and we are greeted with a ton of plastics, a little bit of cloth, and a ton of this fake carbon fiber plastic pattern thing that's all over the place. So as I mentioned, this is a SV, which gives you this gauge screen here, which is actually pretty configurable. It's pretty impressive how much you can do with it. You can see all your driver assists here that this car is equipped with. You have your lane departure, your blind spot on your mirrors. You have your parking sensors. You got your tire pressure stuff. That's the MPG, but I've been driving it in town, so it's to be expected. It's a screen in the SV model. Actually, this particular one does have wired Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. It works pretty well and it has pretty decent speakers. However, the base S doesn't come with this stereo. It looks like this one, but it doesn't have the CarPlay and a few other features on it. The menu looks a little bit older and a little bit different than this one. The typical cheap interior stuff is visible here. These are completely made out of plastic. There isn't any lights over on the mirror. Peep the sees the speed sticker. You have your typical manual climate adjustable stuff over here. This one, unfortunately, AC is currently working on full blast, which is a little bit of a quality control problem probably with these cars. As I mentioned earlier, there's your stop start engine button and your lever to your CVT transmission. No manual adjustment, however you do have a sport mode button on the transmission lever itself. Overall, this is not a bad cabin to be in, considering this car could be had for sub $20,000. Typical Nissan buttons right there. You only get auto up and down driver window. The rest of the windows are of course automatic, no more crank windows, but they do not have a auto up and down option. And speaking of options, one option that this particular one is missing is the center console and your armrest, which is a $320 option, and this one interestingly isn't equipped with it. Another thing that's an option, I believe it's 100 and change, is these floor mats in the Versa. Hopping into the back seat of the Nissan Versa, and honestly this is not a bad place to be. I don't have much to complain about. I am about 5'10" sitting behind myself, and I'm actually pretty impressed compared to the last few cars I've been reviewing. This thing has pretty adequate amount of space. I've actually seen people up to 6'2" sit back here comfortably, no problem. And you know, the hump in the floor isn't too bad, so I guess short term you could fit 3 adults back here, but definitely 2 adults at least in the back seat comfortably, no problem, even though this is a smaller vehicle. There are no physical buttons to actually get into the trunk of the Versa, so you need your key fob, and there's just the popper, no springs. And it's actually a decent bit of space. You know, these cars don't have a whole lot of, I guess, thick body panels, so you get a lot of storage space inside of them. Same as the back seat. This isn't bad at all for something in the compact size segment. You also do get a spare tire and your jack in this thing, so if you get a flat, no problem. And that's all I have for the outside and the interior of the Versa. So without further ado, let's hop in and take this thing for a spin. All right, driving the Nissan Versa SV. So in theory and in spirit, this is supposed to be the cheapest car in America. However, as it's configured here, this car is about a $20,000 to $21,000 MSRP. And I apologize for the loud air conditioning noise. The only setting on the AC that's currently working on this thing is when you put it on the maximum setting. So, and it's 98 degrees currently down in Texas. So I apologize for that. But anyways, the driving experience. Honestly, the cheap, basic, small cars have come a very long way from, you know, the Ford Pintos and more recently, I guess, like the older Kias and Hyundais, entry model Accents, and even the first generation Versa that they introduced, or the Toyota Yaris. It's definitely driving a lot more beefy on the road. It doesn't feel as cheap as they used to. As far as the handling goes, of course, it sits higher up. It has very narrow tires, so it does have quite a bit of body roll. However, the benefit here is that it's super light. These cars kind of are still back in time because they don't have a whole lot of computer systems. So that allows them to be a lot lighter than a lot of modern examples, like say an Altima or a Maxima is nowadays. So it does actually add a little bit to the fun factor of this thing. It's a more tossable vehicle. As far as the amenities in here, you do have CarPlay on the stereo. You do have a screen in the gauge cluster on the SV model. However, the base only comes with a regular tachometer like the old ones used to have. The interior, as I showed earlier, is cluttered with all this fake carbon fiber stuff, which is supposed to make it feel a little more premium, or I guess less bland than it would be otherwise. The brakes on this car aren't the best, especially because the rear brakes on this car are still drum brakes. for cost savings. So there's a little bit of a spongy feel to the pedal, but it gets the job done as long as you're not going super fast. As far as driver assists go, these can be had with front and rear brake assist, and it's actually can be optioned with the basic S model. You can also get the lane departure warning, which this one has. It's a lot of safety features for something of this price point. Also, it has a backup camera and backup sensors, which also you can option on the very, very basic models. You don't necessarily have to get the SV for that. Technically, theoretically, from what I've seen, the manual transmission basic ones aren't as the promised 15,800 MSRP. With a few options, they're usually between the $16,000 to $17,000 range. But Nissan does win the MSRP game for the cheapest brand new vehicle in America, because the starting price of this car is $15,800 and change. But that is, of course, with the manual transmission. And speaking of transmission, the CVT in this car feels a lot different than the most CVTs I've driven in, say, last generation Altimas. As far as I recall, they don't shift like this one does. This car, even in regular drive, you know, it doesn't have manual selection for your shifts, but even in regular drive and not in sport mode, it shifts something. I didn't really count, but it feels like a 4-speed or 3 or 4-speed. And it actually adds to the low-end torque of this thing, because it's a gutless engine. This is a 1.6 liter with 122 horsepower. So if they would have put a regular CVT like the older ones used to have, you would really feel that. I think these used to have like a 10-11 second 0 to 60. I believe this one's just a little bit faster because it does actually go through the gears, or the gears that are computerized. So that actually makes the driving a little less mundane and boring, which in the old ones it would just stick the RPMs all the way to the end until you're done accelerating. As far as the bits and pieces in the interior go, I mean, it does of course feel cheap, but it's not that bad. And here's the car under full acceleration, and that's 60. So I mean, it's not that bad. It gets out of its own way. It's definitely very good daily driving wise. I believe that fuel economy city-wise is mid-high 20s, and highway these are rated for 35 miles per gallon, which isn't bad at all, although you do need to be a little gentle with the throttle on it to achieve the mid-high 30s with this thing. But for the price range, it's a pretty good package. You get all the amenities in a vehicle, especially if you spend in the 20s and get the SV. You do even get a CarPlay with pretty good speakers. No complaints there. It has actually pretty good bass. It's a pretty good value for money. You do have your safety features. You do have your screen in the gauge screen down here. You have push to start with this thing. You know, more key in the ignition like the old Versas. It's a solid package for something right around between the $16,000, $17,000 to $20,000 vehicles. I would definitely take one of these over a Mitsubishi Mirage. The Mirage just doesn't feel like a car you want to drive or be in on the highway. It kind of feels a little bit more like a city car, something you don't want to go past 60 miles an hour in. This one, it feels solid. You can go on the highway, you can drive it daily and not have too many problems with the stability of this thing on the road and the noise on the interior. And that's all I have for the 2021 Nissan Versa SV. So give me your opinions down in the comments below. Let me know if you would spend, you know, 17 to 20 grand of your money on one of these brand new. If you have something like this, if you have a economy vehicle, and what's your experiences with it. But as far as this video goes, this one is over. So thank you so much for watching. Smash that like button. Take care. Peace out, and I'm out.